Hey folks, we made it to our video about the ear. Now the ear has three parts. It's going to be an external ear, also called the outer ear, the middle ear, and also the internal ear, also called the inner ear. Okay? Now what's going to happen? Well, our external ear is going to collect sound and direct the sound towards the eardrum. So that's going to be our tympanic membrane here, our eardrum. And the tympanic membrane or the eardrum is really the lateral boundary between the external ear and the middle ear. So what's going to happen is as you go, the sound is going to go through that tympanic membrane and it's going to be amplified and transmit vibrations towards the inner ear. And here's our inner ear cavity here. Now the inner ear is really cool because not only does it allow for hearing, it also is going to have the ability to convert those vibrations to nerve impulses and focus on balance. Let's talk a little bit more about that. That means that external ear and middle ear are all about hearing. But the inner ear is hearing and equilibrium, okay? There's going to be receptors in the inner ear, but they're in different structures. And so, for example, you have the semi canals that are going to have receptors to help us respond to kind of rotational movement of the head, for example. And then you also have different receptors in the vestibule. That's going to be like this egg-shaped cavity that helps us detect head position, or of course gravity on the head, or just a slight head tilt. And all it's going to help us with, again, our ability to have different forms of equilibrium outside of just hearing as well. No matter what, the sound's going to travel to the inner ear, and then it's going to travel through a nerve to the brain to process it as hearing. So let's focus on the outer ear first and just get some details about it. There's going to be three parts. There's going to be our auricle or a pinna. There's going to be the external acoustic meatus. And then there's going to be that tympanic membrane, or again, our eardrum. So here is our auricle or pinna. As you can see, it's going to be made of the helix here and the lobe, okay, our earlobe. So you can also say helix and lobule. And the whole function is collect and funnel sound into the ear canal. We have here. Now the ear canal, or you call it auditory canal, is called the external acoustic meatus. And this is kind of this short tube line with little hairs. And of course, you can also have sebaceous glands there, and also Cerumeans glands, which is going to be for earwax as well. Protect the ear as the sound is traveling down. And again, it also can help with trapping debris. And the whole goal is to just keep directing sound down to the eardrum. And the eardrum is going to be this very, very thin connective tissue membrane. And it's going to separate the external ear and the middle ear. And the whole goal is that it's going to vibrate with sound waves and transmit that energy to the small little bones inside the middle ear. So again, the sound's going to hit this, it's going to vibrate, and it's going to transmit those sound waves to these three bones inside the middle ear, which is the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Now, the middle ear is this air-filled cavity within the temporal bone that is lined by mucosa. Again, the lateral boundary here is going to be the tympanic membrane, and then the medial boundary is going to be these kind of oval and round windows that you can see here. So there's a little round window here, and then the stapes are going to be in this oval window as well. And as we were saying, when you actually have the vibrations come to the tympanic membrane, it's going to, of course, transmit those sounds to the middle ear, and then you have these three different bones here in the middle ear, or we also call them ossicles or ear ossicles. That's going to be the malleus, it looks like a hammer. It's going to be the stapes, that looks like a stirrup, and also the incus, that looks like an animal. The whole purpose of this middle ear is to, again, amplify and transfer sound from the eardrum so that it can go to the inner ear and, again, go to the brain so we can process it as hearing. Also, it's going to help with maintaining the proper vibration of the eardrum through sound conduction because of the little bones that we have here. Another thing we notice is this tube, this auditory tube, or pharyngotympanic tube. And this is basically a narrow canal that's going to connect your middle ear to your nasopharynx area. And this is going to help equalize pressure on both sides of the eardrum and ensure proper hearing and to prevent membrane distortion. So one thing I always think about this is our Eustachian tube, you can also call it. And a lot of times if people have infections, sometimes you have to drain fluid. You might have issues draining fluid here. You might have to have a tube to help you drain fluid in the Eustachian tube. One thing I always remember is that every time you swallow, you can relieve ear popping, right? So sometimes when you're on a plane, you just try to keep on swallowing everything to remove any kind of ear popping. And that's because the more you swallow, then it kind of allows, you can have equalization of pressure here. So every time I swallow, then again, I'm trying to equalize the pressure down that tube, and that's also another thing I remember when it comes to that. Now let's get into more details about these tiny little inner ear bones. So again, they're very, very tiny, but the whole purpose is for them to, again, transfer sound that comes from that tympanic membrane in the eardrum to the inner ear. And again, create a certain sound conduction system by doing that. So we have our malleus, which is going to be our hammer. That's going to attach directly to that eardrum. Then we're going to have our incus or our anvil. That's going to link basically the malleus to the stapes. And the stapes is going to fit into that little oval window of the inner ear. Remember we said that when it comes to the middle ear, we have the oval and round windows, right? So we said the oval window is going to be basically that boundary between the inner ear and the middle ear, whereas the round window was really specifically going to be in the middle ear itself. And the whole goal of the round window is to act as kind of like a pressure release valve. So if you think of it as kind of take that buildup of the resulting pressure of the sound waves and allowing it to be released. Whereas the oval window is going to basically transmit sound vibrations into the inner ear through fluid. So it's almost like going from sound waves to fluid waves by the time it gets to the inner ear, and specifically when you get to the cochlea, which is that spiral part of the ear. So let me just go back and show you. By the time you get to the cochlea here, that's where we're going to be taking, see that, it's better to look at it in this little visual. Again, find the visual that works for you. But as you can see, we have a round window. Where's my round window? Yeah. I have my round window here, and then I have the oval window. The stapes is there. That's kind of going to be our boundary, that oval window between the inner ear and, again, the middle ear. And then the round window is right there by the eustachian tube, which makes sense because if it's going to be relieving excess pressure, then we have a lot more room for it to do so. And then also when it comes to the fluid portion here, we can't see all the details, but there's different types of lymph that's moving around, specifically and endolymph, which is what we'll talk about later on. That's going to allow those sound vibrations to be converted to, again, fluid or waves within a fluid. Now, the next thing we might be wondering is how do all these little tiny bones connect? Well, they connect by synovial joints, and they're supported by a bunch of ligaments, and you can see as well. They also have muscles they're supported by, so we see a muscle here and a muscle here. They're important because when they contract when you have a lot of loud noise. So to protect all the hearing receptors from any damage, then the muscles are going to contract to protect it that way. Okay, so that's what's really cool about those muscles. Those are called the tensor tympani, and of course, it's stapedius muscle. But the overall function of these ear ossicles, or these little tiny bones, is to transmit that vibratory motion of the eardrum to the oval window, which then is going to go to the inner ear. That's the whole purpose. All right, so let's kind of go through this. We're going to have sound that's going to go through the auditory canal here. And then, again, as the sound is going through, there's going to be a lot of hair cells and earwax there to help for protection of the actual canal. Okay? Then those sound waves are going to hit the tympanic membrane or eardrum. It's going to cause vibrations. And then those vibrations are going to move the ossicles, or the three bones, inside of the middle ear. And then through the oval window, those sound vibrations are going to go into the inner ear, which is basically a fluid-filled system. And that's going to generate the nerve impulses. That's going to travel through the cochlear branch of the cranial nerve so that it goes to the brain and sound is interpreted. Okay, so that's kind of how it all works. Now let's go ahead and get into that last little piece, which is that fluid-filled system of the inner ear. Again, the inner ear is a fluid-filled system of hearing and balance. And it is made up of perilymph and endolymph, which is basically the fluid that moves in response to sound or any kind of head movements or anything that's going to stimulate hair cells. And the hair cells are the specific receptors for the actual ear. Remember those special sense receptors? Those are the hair cells. The inner ear is always called a labyrinth. And so there's two parts to the labyrinth. There's going to be the bony labyrinth portion and then the membranous labyrinth portion. So the bony labyrinth portion is going to be the semicircular canals, the vestibule, and the cochlea, which is going to be the spiral portion of the inner ear. You can also see here the cochlea. You're going to see the vestibule and, of course, the semicircular canals as well. Now, there's also the membranous labyrinth, which is going to have the ducts and semicircular ducts, the utricles and the saccules that are within it as well. Let's see all this membrane portion here. We also have the cochlear duct as well. And these are going to be the pieces that are filled with fluid. What fluid? The perilymph and the endolymph. So the perilymph, peri means around, is going to be the fluid that surrounds the membranous labyrinth. So we have our membranous labyrinth, and all the fluid that surrounds it is going to be our perilymph. So you have all the perilymph here. So you got our bony labyrinth, you have the perilymph, and then you also are going to have the membranous labyrinth, which is going to be inside of it filled with endolymph. So we have the membranous portion here, and then we have the endolymph. So if you want to draw this on your own, you say, okay, here's the bony part, and here's the membranous part, and then surrounding the membranous part is the perilymph, and then inside of the actual membrane is going to be the endolymph. There you go. What's the whole purpose of this? It's to house and protect the sensory structures for hearing and balance. So that's the whole goal. It's like all these things are going to be working together to help with hearing and balance, and we'll talk about that next, but we need to make sure that they're being protected. That's the whole function of the structure of it itself. Also, the perilymph and endolymph is going to be able to transmit those vibrations and stimulate hair cells for sound and equilibrium detection. So it all kind of works together. All right, let's get into the details. We have the vestibule and also the semicircular canal. Now, the structure of the vestibule is kind of like this central, you can always say central egg-shaped cavity, okay, that has the saccule and again the utricle. So we can kind of look at that here. So here's the utricle, here's the saccule, excuse me. And their whole goal is to detect head position and gravity. And what is this going to do? It's going to maintain static equilibrium. So static equilibrium means the equilibrium when you only have really, really slight movements or you're not moving at all. You don't want to be able to, you want to be able to stand up straight, right? You don't want to just be stand up straight and swaying a lot back and forth. That can start to say that you might have some inner ear issues or conduction issues of sound, all those little details. How does it do this? Well, each sac is going to contain maculae. And the maculae are basically like these hair cell sensors, little sacs that have all the hair cells within them, meaning those hair cells are those specialized receptor cells for the ear. And their whole goal is to detect any kind of head tilt or straight line motion, okay? Or another thing to think of it is any type of change in speed, like if you're speeding up or slowing down as you're walking forward or you're on an elevator and it starts and stops, you have that feeling of like, hey, am I balancing myself? And I don't know, if you go on the elevator and you just try to go to levels 4, straight up back down to level 1, for example, sometimes when you're stopping, you kind of have to get your body back in the same position. Well, it's going to be the vestibule and all these little, basically the maculae or these hair cell sensor sacs that are going to help us be able to understand the position we have, especially if we're standing still or supposed to be standing still. And the whole goal is to help us maintain static equilibrium and also sense our head position. So you don't want to have a situation where, and this usually happens if you have like vertigo or something and you have inner ear issues, where when you're on the elevator and it starts to move, you may still feel like you're continuing to move. Whereas everyone else, if you do not have vertigo, for example, you'll realize, okay, I'm on the elevator, and your overall maculae within these vestibules will help you understand that, hey, you still aren't supposed to be moving that fast. This is just basically the overall position you're in. All right, then we have our semicircular canal. So we have our semicircular canals here. Okay, boom, boom, boom. We have the anterior one here, the posterior one here, and then we have the lateral one here. Okay? And these are going to contain the membranous semicircular ducts that are going to connect to the utricle inside the vestibule. Okay? Now the function here is that they do also contain receptors. And these receptors are specific because they're going to detect rotational head movements. So if we have one where it's going to detect slight tilt, or if you have a lot of like speed in a linear speed, for example, or you're like walking fast in a straight line, for example, then you're also going to have some that's going to detect dynamic equilibrium, where you have a lot of rotational head movements. You can also say any kind of angular movements during motion. Okay, so these are the two things that's going to help us start talking about equilibrium when it comes to hearing. It's not just about hearing only. We also know that the inner ear does also focus on equilibrium, so that helps us do that. Now let's finish up and talk about the cochlea, where we want to convert those sound waves into electrical impulses that move down an axon so that we can actually hear, right? And interpret what we're hearing as well. So the cochlea is going to be the spiral, bony chamber that extends from the vestibule. So we see that we have our vestibule here, and then we go into our cochlea, and then we also have a lot of nerves surrounding the vestibular nerve, We also have a cochlear nerve here and a vestibular nerve here as well. And it's going to be the cochlear nerve that's going to, again, send those auditory signals to the brain for sound perception to allow us to hear. Remember from before, we also have the cochlear duct here, whole cochlear duct. We just want to go back to that. We can see that as well. We have a cochlear duct here, and this is going to have the organ of Corti, and that's going to be our hearing receptor. An organ of Corti is usually in the middle of this as well. Okay. And inside of this are going to be, again, those special receptors, those hair cells. So we can see that here. We have some hair cells here, and they're going to move based on the sound vibrations that they get. Then we also have the basilar membrane here. And what's going to happen is these sensory hair cells are going to move with the basilar membrane, and the vibrations are going to generate that nerve impulse that we need down the cochlear nerve, or the cochlear branch of the cranial nerve, specifically cranial nerve 8, if you want that as details, to the brain so that sound is interpreted. And here, the hair cells, we do have the cochlear nerve fibers here, that again is going to go into this nerve to the brain. Okay? So that's pretty much it when it comes to the ear. Remember, we have the external ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear, and the whole goal is to make sure that we're focused on hearing and equilibrium. So when it comes to the inner ear, it's going to be our vestibules and our semicircular canals that are going to help us with equilibrium or head movement. And then we're going to have our cochlea, specifically inside of the actual cochlea is the organ of Corti. And also we're going to have sensory hair cells and, of course, the basilar membrane that is going to move to be able to send that signal down to the brain. And that's how our overall inner ear is going to work. Hopefully, again, in lab, when you get to lab, you'll be able to see some really cool structures and be able to get more detail of this. And I feel like when it's more hands-on, it's just easier to connect to the information. So I'll see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.